So I'm so excited today. We are celebrating International Design Day 2026, and I'm privileged to have with me Lucy Holmes, who is the founder of Holmes Studio based in the UK. And Lucy and her team were actually the creative geniuses behind the visuals for International Design Day as part of the International Council of Design, of which SEGD is the host this year. This year's theme is the spaces in between. International Design Day's intention is really to bring a light to the impact of design on the world. And so it's not purely graphics or experience design or fashion or industrial design, it's all those things. And so when we approached you with the concept of the spaces in between, what was it, or what did it bring to you to think about how you might manifest that in a visual language and kind of the brand for this?
First of all, thank you for having me. It's very nice to be here. I think when we first talked about it, my initial thoughts were around, as a typographer mainly, of keeping something very, very simple, and that the design should be a platform for everyone else. So it should be open and accessible. And so very quickly I thought about using a parentheses, a typographic device that creates a space for something special to happen within it.
You brought some animation to that, which was, I think, really fun because it's very simple, but the nice thing is that you've created a toolkit, so any designer can kind of take that expression and make it their own through the kit of parts. But that kit of parts, what brings it to life is the animation and I think the colors. So talk a little bit about how you did that.
Yeah, well, I suppose the color was really much more of a collaborative discussion, wasn't it, between yourselves and us, about having a color palette that felt appropriate for 2026. And as a result of that conversation, we kind of turned up the volume a little bit.
It was a little bit more unexpected.
In terms of the animation, working with my team, we wanted to make something very, very simple, really quite dynamic, and also flexible, so that we knew from the very beginning there was a sort of set of outputs that we had to produce. So it was about making it fun for people to use, but easy for people to use, and ultimately the kind of identity, the parentheses that can flex and grow, can hold, be a container, can be a frame, can be a device to make it really easy for people to use, but hopefully it's strong enough that whatever people do with it, it's got a consistent look which unifies kind of International Design Day.
And we're really excited because we have, I think, 16 different chapters just within SUGD who are doing events, both in person and virtual. And then we're going to be hosting, I think I'm hosting a series of like 8 interviews. You're my first. That will be streaming live on International Design Day. I want to talk to you though, because the theme, we've known each other quite a while. Maybe you could give a little bit of background, because I think that'll contextualize it, of the kind of work that you do.
Originally trained, I think, very much as a typographer. I was trained at RISD over here in the US. That was sort of gave me, I suppose, traditionally taught by quite a lot of Swiss designers, the toolkit, which has actually, as a professional, enabled me to design anywhere, kind of for anything. And the area that I've got most involved in, and one of the areas that I care very much about, is people and place. So the idea of creating spaces in between is exactly that work. Whether you're looking at an object in a museum, and that's one experience, it's kind of framed in time, to an entire room, to a whole building, to a public space. It's everything that happens within those spaces. So when we talked about it, it was like a total gift.
Well, it's interesting too because of the kind of work that both you and I have done over our careers. Think about spaces in between, in particular to like museums. You have the past, you have the present, you have the future. You have objects in space. You have the juxtaposition of like you have an object, but there are so many different viewpoints and stories that one object can actually tell. They become those spaces in between. So when you're thinking about designing an interpretive experience, how does that come into play, those spaces in between?
I think there's also one other space, which is, where do I sit? I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, I need the bathroom. Those are also all of those things we have to consider. And I think it's about, particularly now where we are bombarded from social media by opinions, and I think we're losing sight of what's actually information and not an opinion. I think also trying to get people off their devices. So it's about thinking about engagement, about magical moments, about joy, about wonder, whether it's one object and how we interpret that. We've been thinking about a project at the moment where, what if you could put a vase next to a sculpture and actually on the face of it looks really incongruous. But in fact, during the thousands and thousands of years of their life, they actually were once in Venice together. And almost like they were at a party. And this idea that you could be giving people ways into content that aren't all about when it was made, what it's made of,
right,
how many thousands and thousands of years ago, because sometimes it's really hard for that to make any sense. If something's 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years old, how do we all really contextualize that? What does it mean? It's like they're objects that are frozen. It's like frozen archives. And actually one of the things that I think we think about a lot is, how do we get people to engage with objects and tell stories today? And it makes sense today. And it gives you something to go away with that isn't just, wow, I saw this really old stuff.
Continuing that conversation around the spaces in between, I think of personal experiences where I went to an exhibition or, I saw an artist's work or even a performance, and I leave and there's something really sticky. Going to like the African American History and Culture Museum, you can't just leave and go have dinner. Like, you need time to decompress and kind of process those, as you were talking about, like moments of joy. Like if you're at a place and it's like really active and intense and exciting, like leaving there, it gives you something else, a different kind of feeling. So oftentimes as designers, we focus on the objects that we're creating, but I think in this conversation, what we were trying to do is to say, okay, that's fine. Obviously we design exhibits or objects or we can show identity through fashion and brand through, typography, but then ultimately there's the why and who cares.
Yeah.
And so to people who aren't trained as designers, for them to understand that these things have resonance in ways that stay with you. How do you think about that when you design something? So it's not just that one moment that person was there, but what do you kind of hope that they would take away from the designs that you're creating?
I think if they take away anything, that's a bonus. I think either learning something or, it's weird. We think a lot about loneliness and what work museums can support that.
Bringing people together.
Well, yeah, because our libraries are closing. There are no community spaces. In the UK, our museums are free. Actually, they have more and more of a sort of strong civic duty to go beyond just being somewhere where you can go and look at objects and exhibitions. They should be places that actually have lovely seating and a good cup of coffee.
Social gathering.
And somewhere, where maybe you live locally and actually you're quite lonely. You should be able to go to a museum and someone recognizes you, and maybe they know your name.
Yeah.
And actually that's in terms of visitor experience, if that's really powerful. It's not just revenue and sort of commercial value, it's actually human value. We did a project at the Science Museum in London about the history of medicine. And, there was this one display that was part of the collaboration, which is just a series of glass eyeballs. And we were going to talk about the fact that you could, these were kind of, you could go and get an eyeball if you lost your eye. And they're all displayed on sticks and they point in different directions. So if the very first experience of that is something quite funny.
Right. And then you've got these eyes looking at you.
Yeah. So they could have sat stagnant in a case, and actually what's happened is they've been brought to life. And so that's a beginning point. That gives somebody a way in, which is unexpected in a science museum.
Yeah.
And so that's, the thought that went into that is an important draw, because it makes it unintimidating. It also makes it quite funny.
Yeah.
And I think we have to appeal to, everything gets really heavy and really serious. And I think there's a place for humor and a place for kind of play. And I think that's really, really important to fight for.
Yeah, and I think too, we assume curators and historians and interpreters and designers sometimes assume a particular vantage point around how we tell a narrative. So it made me think, one of my very first big projects was the Geology Gems and Minerals Hall here in Washington, the Smithsonian, and a 6,000 specimen. And at the very end of it, there were like all these leftover pieces that didn't make it in a case. And the curator said to me, because he knew I was quite creative and, didn't have quite the science brain around the minerals. I mean, I love them and they're beautiful. And he said, well, Cybelle, why don't you just take these and do something with them? They're important specimens, but they didn't make the cut. And so I created this rainbow and just organized them by their color and their shape. And ended up being one of the most popular cases, but it was like a leftover, And I think thinking about spaces in between, it's almost like maybe we should start there. Like you and I had the whole conversation for a couple of years about point of zero. Remember that? Like where do we start from? And sometimes I think we go too quickly to the end product, and we should be thinking about more those spaces in between. Like you're saying, even just like the place of respite, the place to have a cup of coffee, that's part of that whole experience as well.
Yeah, because I think we talk a lot about accessibility, and actually that can sometimes get very focused on, is the type big enough? Can a wheelchair access this display case? But accessibility means for different levels of education, different levels of intelligence, if you like. And actually everyone deserves a chance to be pulled towards something. And I think that's where, like your display of minerals is so unexpected. It helps people get closer to something that they probably don't understand either. And I think we have the responsibility to really think so far around the edges of a brief, and make sure, our job, particularly at this, I guess, point in our careers when we've been doing this for a while, is to be a part of the conversation and not just a response to the conversations, actually help our clients, not in a cocky way in anything like that, but is this really the right brief? Can we do more? Not in a deliberately sort of antagonistic way, but in a way that really goes beyond. I think that's part of the spaces in between is an opportunity to go beyond.
Where do you see design still falling short in spaces where human connection actually happens? What could we be better or do better?
It's funny sitting here today as with you as the CEO of SEGD. But it's all about collaboration across our disciplines. Years ago, it would be architecture very much first.
Yeah.
And then interiors, and then got these spaces. Now what are we going to shove in them? By the nature of projects and the scale and budgets, inevitably you have to make decisions around big architectural interventions. But I think it would be so great if we could still try, particularly in museums and galleries, keep those conversations going around what do we want this to feel like? Because that can happen. That should happen at the very beginning. It shouldn't happen when we've already got a square box.
Yeah.
So I really, and it's happening more and more, but I really push for that conversation around what can we all, breaking down the boundaries of our disciplines and working together, low ego, what can we do above and beyond for our communities, for our society, and for the better of this world that we're living in at the moment, which is very uncertain.
And chaotic.
Yes.
And intense. And that is a pure joy and privilege that I have as CEO of SEGD, is that I feel like most of the people that are working in the space around experience design are truly doing it because they really feel an obligation on behalf of the end users. They understand how families experience spaces, that families are not, one particular kind of family, that you might have an infant and you might have an older kid and that you might have a parent in a wheelchair. You might have a grumpy, hungry husband. This is how people move through space. And so I think we're trying to give a gift back of a place and an experience that can add to someone's life, to open their mind to something that maybe they didn't see or understand, or a perspective that isn't part of them or their culture or their language. It's, that's what to me is very exciting about the field. And I feel it is very hopefully civically focused. And also, how do we really create things that are welcome and inviting, and that people can, be participatory. It's not kind of like a one way, we're going to tell this to you, we're going to show this to you. But I think more and more, and the spaces in between, is what is that iterative conversation that we have with those guests?
Yeah, and I think, taking it to kind of life, if you like, but, I've been working, I think, in 30-something years, and hopefully still have the kind of attitude of just show up every work day and give it my best. And it's amazing as you get older, the kind of support things that we put in place. So we're both meditators, fitness, not working, yeah. And being, I think, really, really intentional with our time. When do we sit with someone in our team? When do we take a break? And in a way, those are also really important spaces in between, about human interaction. There are times where projects can get so intense, and one has to sort of take a moment and just think, what we're doing, luckily for what we're doing, it's not life-threatening. And actually, can we just take a breath? And I think that's all really important. I think when I started Holmes Studio, it was very much about the whole of one's work life. Mm-hmm. And having a place where it works with life, as well as doing great work, and not having one sacrificed over the other. So I think about space like that as well, of the construct of my work life and giving my best to my team and to my clients. How do I, for myself, make sure I can do that and show up and be my, I guess, the best version of myself?
I've always admired that about you. And I think it actually shows up in how beautifully designed your work is. And it's important. We don't talk about that enough. Like, as a designer, you're not on demand. You don't know that your most creative moment's going to happen to be between 9 o'clock and 5 o'clock. It could be on the drive in traffic, at 11 o'clock at night, or, on the weekend. And I think as a leader at SEGD, I try to be very conscientious that experience is in our name. And that when we engage, whether we're hosting an event or whether we're writing an article or we've been at the Global Design Awards this week together, jury, that we're very intentional about how we treat our community so that they can flourish and do their best work. So the space in between, to me, does resonate, that it's not just the product, but also the process behind how we come to that product and how we treat each other, and the spaces and environments we create to allow people to kind of live their best life, have their best experience.
I remember when we did that SEGD event at the V&A
a million years ago.
I think 2012, maybe 2011, and you spoke and you said, if I'm awake, I'm a collaborator. And I think that's one thing that's always really resonated with me, because actually I hadn't really ever thought about it like that. And I think the second thing is that this community, SEGD, is where I know when I first met the organisation 20 years ago, I felt like I'd met my people again, having left university or art school. And actually, by the very nature of the work that we do, we are a really open, warm group. Yeah. But we also have a really good laugh. And we don't take ourselves too seriously. Yeah. And I think that's because of the area of the work that we do. It's about people. Right. And we all need everything. We need it all.
And it's give and take. It's a lot of give and take. It's meeting people in the middle and compromise and push and pull intentions, and it's the parentheses.
Yeah.
We're all back to that. Well, thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
amazing. I always love catching up with you. It's always wonderful. It's so great. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it. I can't wait for everybody to see and use your graphics for the International Design Day, and look forward to more in the future.
Thank you.